Dave has worked at Miramar for a long time. Johnson Controls, huge background in controls space. He's my
mechanical, just the usual stuff.
He's my technical arm. You know, I have no idea how to do anything, and Dave can explain that. You know, the challenge is that Dave worked for Johnson. He was basically the key to all building controls on the base, and we couldn't really operate without him. And then we lost the Johnson contract, and we had to figure out we got him government, so he's here. But when we hired him, we had the foresight to say, okay, I'm not just going to buy a building control guy. I'm going to buy a control guy who can do all the controls. So he left Johnson and stepped into the role where here he's responsible for all the systems that we have. And so this space is really going to be his to figure out what we're going to do with all of the systems that go on this wall. But it's challenging because, you know, we're all still trying to figure that out. We're all still trying to figure out what all these systems do together and what the microgrid does. But you know, what these guys would care about is like, what kind of person do you need? What are the skill sets that we have, and what are the skill sets that you don't have? And you know, one of the things I talked about was like, nobody knows the after treatment stuff in our industry, and that's just an example. But you know,
where do you guys come from? What do you?
So we're GC Green's the company, and we're an SDVOSB, and we're on the CEC grant to actually look at the workforce component, targeting operations and maintenance. So it's like one of those things that we're going to throw this to you, that I don't think they explained to us that how challenging that part of it things are going to be.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, it's a wonderful aspect of that contract to look at that.
Yeah.
And try to address some of the issues.
Yeah.
You know, where do you start? I mean, is it an IBEW thing where you start training electricians? You know, high voltage. I mean, the top tier. You know, electricians that'll turn out of a you know an apprenticeship program or something. Is it, you know, and a lot of those guys are coming out into those programs after graduating with an electrical degree from like UCSD or SDSU. Well, I know a lot of them locally come out of there. But where do you start? Where do you go? You know, who's going to be the guy that, you know, that's opening switches and making the decision to bring on additional assets? You know, where do those guys come from? Right now, it looks like we're going to get them out of the military.
That's the thought.
Where they're the highest qualified candidates in the short run that we've had in soliciting and the responses that we got. They were like nuke EMs, electrician mates. You know, nuke anything is going to be an intelligent guy that you can sit down and explain, you know, how things operate, and they just the way they're wired. If they were, you know, a successfully graduated, honorably discharged, you know, usually Navy nuke, they'll be able to wrap their head around just about anything. But you know, how do you fill that gap between getting somebody up to speed? I mean, these are a lot of important issues that what you guys are looking at will help.
And I think that when we get under operation and we realize the issues and the challenges, I mean, just working yesterday through like the controls here, it seems like it's almost probably 50-50 whether you're going to have a real physical mechanical issue or you're going to have a network control issue.
Absolutely.
Right.
Oh yeah, I'll bet, you know, back in the day when things were electromechanical, the mechanical failures were like 20% of the problem. It was all the electrical and electromechanical, you know, controls that would trip things. So now we've got a software layer on top of that. You know, I mean, this is going to be an interesting ride. And there's a lot of good information that can be gleaned out of this by people like yourselves looking at that manning aspect of, you know, we put in these systems. We've got the reach back in the engineering department from NAVFAC Southwest to survive. You know, we're going to be okay. But, you know, just maximizing this system, leveraging everything we can out of it, from not only the cost avoidance aspect of energy, but the maintenance cost avoidance, doing, predictive maintenance as opposed to, or what do they call it? Which term am I looking
Preventative
for?
maintenance.
Yeah, instead of like scheduled preventative
Reliability centered
maintenance.
maintenance.
Pardon me?
Reliability centered maintenance.
Well, yeah, it's one aspect of it, but I'm thinking like
You're
the
talking about like
conditional base.
instead of just replacing something when it's told to be replaced, actually replacing
Looking
it
at
when it needs
to be
based
replaced.
on
Yes,
data.
yeah,
Based on
cost
data.
avoidance from that concept. There's a term for it.
It's like
just-
predictive versus scheduled. Or
Yeah.
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 Yeah, so we were having a conversation that, in the short term, trying to put together an interim org chart around this would be one thing, but then ultimately trying to get to a larger, what's the ideal model for this?
Sure.
And how some of the expertise, and this was a deep thought, like how does this get spread across multiple microgrid installations? Is kind of what your ultimate.
Kind of make it replicable.
Yes.
Is that what you're thinking?
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Well, that's the task from the CC, is not only figure it out here, but make it replicable.
Does anybody have that already? Has anybody worked on this? Are you guys able to?
I researched it,
leverage?
and really it just
Not
does,
finding a
it
lot
does
of-
not
I mean,
exist.
it's
Okay.
bits and pieces, right?
Yeah.
So, you have operators of cogeneration plants
Sure.
everywhere, right?
Yeah.
But are they really
Grid
communicating?
operators.
Grid operator, right?
Sure,
So
yeah, that's
you
kind of
have
our-
gaps, right? So there's
Yeah.
a lot of good, power plant engineers who understand the emissions, SCRs,
Sure.
and that, have a good.
And are able to learn
Right.
those, with a pretty,
Right.
quick learning curve.
Right, but do they have every aspect of a microgrid, on the different components? Possibly not, so you have to train,
Yeah,
right? You
yeah.
have to do a lot of training, and a lot of it is factory training. Like when I asked what the SCR manufacturers, well,
Hold on, did you say training?
Yeah.
You said something you mentioned?
we have to have that in the.
I
in the
am
program.
a hawk and a big advocate of training, because
Yeah.
I know coming from, I turned out a local 250 and then went to work for the major manufacturers
Mhm.
after getting out of the Navy. And, it's the only way to become expert
Right.
in these systems is training, and at a high level, from people that really understand what's going on, not some program at community
Exactly.
college or something.
It's on-site training with the actual components you're
Those
trying
guys,
to manage.
those
right?
guys are the best.
Right.
Handpicking the brightest you can,
Mhm.
and getting them the training and the hands-on is going to be key, I think, to all of this. And it's what the utilities do.
Yeah.
That's why they end up they pay well, they train well, they respect technical expertise,
And you gotta
and that's
retain-
why they recruit. That's why they recruit well, is
Right.
because they pay well, they train well, and they just end up retaining.
So
I think.
the ideal guy would be a guy with military experience that also went to work for the utilities for a while.
Would be ideal,
Yeah.
I would say.
Or graduate from a nuke program.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, they're all very strange kind of people, but I was out having, I drank a couple of pints with one last night, and they're unique, but like somebody coming out of, a couple of my friends graduated from San Diego State, just electrical, engineering degrees, went into the union and turned out just to get that field experience, that high voltage, learn about, I just call it distribution. What do you guys call it in front of, like the, outside of the fence?
Like Fawaz calls it like the power world.
Yeah,
Like,
there's a
I
term,
don't know.
like a word distribution on the installation,
Transmission.
transmission. Thank you, sir, that's
Oh.
right, that's what I was looking for. But to learn all those aspects of it, so, somebody who comes out of a nuke program, it's just my opinion, somebody who comes out of a nuke program, and they're an electrician has about the same capacity and skill set as somebody who has gone through, a 4-year, program at SDSU or, any, what do they call it?
Probably much more practical experience, though.
In the Navy?
Yeah.
Going on the Navy?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure, but then you go, so the ideal, I think, is like that military experience where you're working on basically a microgrid on a carrier, for example. I mean, that's hardcore generation and distribution. And the guys that I know that went through the IBEW program down here, that not all of them, graduated from, from college. Some of them are just extremely intelligent and really didn't have that as an avenue, but went through that 4-year, apprenticeship program at an IBEW level. They're both about the same, the same caliber to me, and that's what we're hoping to find.
Yeah, and then with the
in this
emissions
solicitation.
experience.
That's from a grid operator.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
then you'll have to find somebody, like in our instance, for the engine, maintenance and after treatment, like Mick was alluding to. I mean, it's gonna be a team.
Well, that was a point when you were walking the door here. So, are you anticipating then ultimately it is a team?
Oh, absolutely, I think it's gonna have to be. Yeah, because the operator isn't gonna be able to perform maintenance or do anything like in the engine room,
Do you
And so
rely
that-
on the equipment vendor during the warranty period to provide that?
You'd have to talk to the boss, and I really don't understand things at that
Well, I
level.
think the maintenance contract is going to have to be so multifaceted. That's what's so concerning. It's like how many subs on the maintenance contract are really required to ensure the whole system works.
Right.
I wrote down this concept and didn't mention it yet, but you add a battery to the microgrid. We understand those benefits, but what is the true value of that? Because you're not only adding complexity, but adding a skill set that's extremely expensive.
And plus, the sustainment tail.
Yeah,
of
so
all
I
of
mean,
them is-
at this point, the sustainment of a battery is probably more difficult than it's worth. And I'm just
Yeah.
guessing because of my experience. And that's the harsh truth that the state needs to figure out. And
But
that's
it'll
probably
take-
the communication.
It'll take places like Miramar willing to take that responsibility on to
Mhm.
kind of go through these, these
Mhm.
issues, to identify them, and then try and use smart people like yourselves, to figure out how to sustain them. The sustainment tail on all this, DOD wide, is extremely difficult for everybody.
Is there a requirement within the DoD to be able to maintain and operate these systems, even build them from scratch, independent of the contractor or the vendor?
No. I think there's organizations within the military who are like doing research. So at XWIC they have
Yeah.
NAVFAC XWIC. There's
Good point.
the Brian Long leads the microgrid testbed thing, and he's doing stuff on his own and learning about things in parallel. But I don't think there's really a drive for it to be done in a vacuum. I think that the military
civilians,
recognizes
yeah,
to do
they-
it.
Yeah, I didn't
Or-
mean it in a vacuum. Like with the FAA, by statute, I believe they're required to be able to maintain and operate systems independently. In the event of an emergency or a national event where the contractor can't
I
get to
think
the
in
site.
some instances, we're doing that,
So
right?
you-
In some
it-
instances,
yeah.
we're driving that ourselves,
Okay.
but I think the FAA probably has a much better handle on what they're supposed to do. When you're in the military, it's such a broader.
The Marine Corps in particular,
It's a
their
much
mission is not to
broader-
maintain systems.
okay.
It's just to, break shit.
Yeah.
Put it in place. Okay.
Yeah.
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 I mean, I know it's harsh, but that's the reality.
Yeah.
When you talk to leadership,
Yeah.
they're about brawn and bullets. They're not about,
I mean, they can
sustainment.
palate
That's
the
kind of
con-
on us. That's what they rely on us for, is-
And they can palate the conversation of, this is what we need to fly airplanes out of Miramar. You can walk that dog a little bit,
issue.
but
Resiliency.
it's still a difficult conversation to really, that conversation doesn't translate to, okay, here's an unlimited budget to do that,
Mhm.
So trying to work within the goal of the program here, I've, very plainly stated that the ability to sustain our system with savings may be enough to prove out the
Sure.
capital investment. So if we can.
God, wouldn't it be great?
If we
I
can
mean, that
find
would be
enough
just
savings to sort of make it net neutral in terms of annual
Yeah.
cost,
Then why not do the resiliency?
then why not
piece?
fund capital investments in
Sure.
resilience?
Are you under the requirement for the 14-day ride-through in the event of an outage?
On this base, with the amount of fuel have on station here in a worst case scenario, well, no, not a worst case scenario, but under a normal operating condition scenario, we can operate for 21 days.
Okay, so.
But I think that the answer to your question is yes, right? And if it's not formalized as of, April 5th,
Right.
it's coming down the pipe, that 14-day
Yeah,
sustainment
that's what I've heard.
is a hard, target to.
The harder
meet.
part for that is, yeah, we have fuel here, but the people.
Right.
I mean, I have nothing that tells
MRATs,
me.
man.
Yeah, I have nothing that tells me that I'm gonna be here. I mean, you got horses at home, like I got little kids at home. I don't work for the military, or I work for the military, but as soon as shit hits the fan, I think about
What are you
that.
saying? You're running?
Yeah, I think about that all the time. If they're not really solving those issues and not understanding that if they want the military to operate the system, that's probably something to work towards.
Yeah, sure.
But
I see what you mean. No, I think they're going to rely on civilians for that 14-day sustainment. But they're going to make us stay here.
Yeah.
We're not going to have that choice. But one interesting aspect of that is water.
Mm-hmm.
14-day sustainment on this military installation. Shit goes south. Things go south. Sorry, you're video.
Yeah.
And how do you power pumps to get pressure and water
and you rely on water
around?
that you don't even control.
Sewage lift.
Mhm.
We don't have our own, power infrastructure for sewage lift. We don't have a lot of sewage lift because of our location. We're mostly gravity fed.
Right.
But that 14-day sustainment's got to go a little bit past just electrons. I mean,
Yeah, water is.
Absolutely.
It's really only the tip of the iceberg in terms of the full resilience conversation.
yeah, I don't get involved in anything.
You gotta
other
take
than
it one step at a time.
water, crap, and electrons.
Yeah, but you gotta first, solve one piece of the pie and
Yeah,
then the
sure.
other and then the other.
So since we really don't have a complete grasp just yet on the org chart and the components of the people, do we have a OpEx budget, a yearly OpEx budget? Not yet. Because we can fill out
Do we have anything?
we can
like,
fill out a huge
yeah.
org chart and not
Yeah.
be able to afford
Yeah,
anything.
not be able to.
But I
afford
think it came back to
anybody
the
on it.
basic, someplace in the calculus of all this is that you're gonna be at least at break even, right?
I know to be honest, I don't even know that because I don't know truly how much revenue or savings that we could get.
Mhm.
Because it's difficult to define. It's difficult to understand what SDG&E is going to charge me to just exist. Managing those, you read the tariffs and the laws and how you're supposed to pay, and it doesn't look good. So like any savings that you could
When
make.
you say it doesn't look good, what do you mean?
Any
Hey,
saving.
can I interject? Can you excuse me?
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Nice to
Hey,
meet you
good to
guys.
meet you. Thanks.
Pleasure.
Any savings that you can make from the system are easily negated for some other charge. You know what I mean? The utility company always gets their money. So operating on this premise that you could save all this money, it's often, to me, in the weeds. It never works out that way.
So the contracts are written in a way to guarantee their revenue stream.
Yeah, I don't know if
Standby
contracts is the right
charges.
word, but the tariffs
Tariff.
are in place
Yeah.
to keep the utilities safe. And there may be some incentives for renewables, but the state's inability to recognize the value of conventional generation is killing us. It's flat out failure in terms of the conversation around microgrids.
Mhm.
My complete opinion, you can send this to the state.
When you say conventional generation, you mean PGs and all that?
Natural gas, diesel, whatever, in my opinion, there's appropriate levels for all generation,
Mhm.
assuming compliance with other rules and regulations. But the problem is the state is so focused on incentivizing other technologies that there's no recognition of a place in the picture for regular generation. And if you don't recognize
That's
that,
so abundant and cheap.
you're trying to make this jump into this 100% renewable world that won't exist unless you're able to bridge the gap to get there. And that's my flag in the sand right there. Like, if we can't figure that out, we're not gonna get there.
So this is my segue to, because I haven't had a chance to introduce Steve and give these guys a chance to introduce some of their background. But one of the things, as he introduces what his software and technology does, is that we're trying to get a view into these microgrids and try to do some planning for them, and so that you know what you're going to have on the back end of it, and a lot of it's anticipating all types of different costs and choices of microgrid elements. But this O&M side of things is kind of new territory to really bake into it. You would use a formalistic approach. It would be some percentage of, because I think you do that. That's how you would do it in the past, of trying to figure out what your operations and maintenance costs would be. But I think in thinking about that, even the visioning of a potential next microgrid, you almost have to start with a number of the things you're talking about, like what's our top level goal of all these things. It seems like in this one you're demonstrating a capability to allow further integration of renewables and solve some of the existing problems that are here, but it wasn't to get to 14-day resiliency based on this particular project, and it wasn't with to say that we're going to have X amount of savings day one. You didn't put a stake in the sand around that, right? It was.
We did.
You did.
To get things moving.
Yeah.
To be honest, when we wrote this project 5 years ago, we wrote 2 weeks. We didn't refer to it as 14 days, which is the buzzword now, but it happened to be the same when
Yeah.
everybody else came up with it. It's just a line the same. But it didn't really matter. It didn't influence how the project was designed. The amount of time that a system operates is not that complicated, but you know what I mean. It's more around the power, which is less dependent on time, right? So the amount of power plant we built was based on infrastructure that we deemed critical, based on analysis and just looking at things. But it wasn't just looking at the critical facilities, it was looking at the opportunity within the electrical system to cover electrical facilities in an easy manner. So we're covering feeders, we're not powering specific buildings. We're tackling a whole portion of the base, whether it be a warehouse in that space or not. It's worth it to power that warehouse to have the simplistic powering of a whole feeder as opposed to a building. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Some of those things, leveraging lower cost to power, or to be more efficient in how you cover it. And we did analysis based on old ideas of what we could save, and there's numbers out there, but it's all.
And you'll be reporting back on performance, right? That's one of the requirements.
Oh.
Yeah.
Did you identify a cost per outage or per hour or per minute
Yeah.
for a critical system?
Yeah, there's a whole paper on it that NREL put together, valuing energy security at Miramar. Ended up being $500,000 a year. There's some math behind it, but it doesn't really mean anything.
I have a real important question. Where's the restroom?
Down the hall.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I think
Yeah,
I'm
he's
a
gotta
little
go
out
on
of time.
vacation.